All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations and occasionally writing or looking at a little code for Murock's Android Programming 2nd Edition by Joel Murock for the AWD1112 or 1112 Java programming class. We are in Chapter 10 talking about the Newsreader app, and I'm up to page 302, how to work with files. All right. So, the author says, now that you understand how to create and execute a thread, you're ready to learn how to write the code that's executed by the thread. This code often reads and writes files. For example, with our Newsreader app, we need to read an RSS feed from the internet and write that data to an XML file. Then we need to read that file and parse it into a series of data objects, in other words, the individual stories. So, the figure that is on the next several slides here shows how to download data from the internet and store it on an Android device. To do that, you get an input stream from the internet, you get an output stream to a file on the device, and you use standard Java I/O methods to read data from the input stream and write it to the output stream. So we need to be using this. These are the classes for downloading. And this shows here basically how to do the download. All right. Now, I'm not going to run through this. I will mention just a couple things. All right. Such as, notice we have here open file output and accepts two parameters. The first is a file name, but not the path. You can't specify a path because Android automatically uses the path, the app's default path. The second parameter that's there specifies the mode that Android uses when it opens the file. Now, why is that important? Well, I thought it showed it on here, but I guess it doesn't. All right. For this parameter, you can use any of the mode underscore constants. The mode private is used in most cases, as is used right here. The mode underscore private constant allows only the current app to work with the file, which is what we'd like to have here. So you can use Java and Android APIs to download a file by reading input from the internet and writing the output to the file system. The mode private stores a constant with a value of 0. Okay, do you need to know that? Not really. All right, so once you go in and you start doing this stuff, then we have to go in and start working with how to read the XML file that was written in the previous figure, and how to use what's called SAX, S-A-X, which is an acronym for Simple API for XML, to parse the XML. So look at it this way. It's like somebody sits there and gives you, let's say that you're building your own newspaper. So you've got somebody giving you literally hundreds of stories. All right, whether it's over the internet or something else, and you're pulling out the ones that you want, and you're putting them, or you're going to put them in your newspaper. So that's what we're talking about doing here. All right, that you're bringing the information in, and then you're parsing it into a format that you want it to be in. Again, maybe that wasn't the greatest of examples, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. These are the classes that you need to work with, SAX, and here's how to do the parsing. Again, I do not know enough about this, have done virtually no work with it, so I'm not of a lot of help. Now, in Figure 10.9 on pages 306 and 307, they show this RSS feed handler class, which, as it says, begins by extending the default handler class. Within here, the first two statements that you see define instance variables for the RSS feed and for the RSS item objects that will be used to store the data within the feed. Then the next statements that you have here, these next 6 statements, define Boolean instance variables. They're all Boolean, so they're all true-false. The class uses these to determine when the various elements of the file are being parsed. And that's what it looks at in here. And again, a lot of code that's shown in here, and I'm not going over it. All right. Moving up to page 310 in figure 1010 on 310 and 311, this shows the RSS feed class, which stores the data for an RSS feed. It includes the feed's title and the publication date, as well as an array list object to store the individual objects. So the code is shown on page 311, 312, and 313. The next several slides. All right, next, let's just take a couple minutes here and talk about how to work with adapters. Again, I'm on page 314, figure 1012 on 314 and 315. So after the newsreader app reads the feed and parses it into a series of objects, stories, whatever you want to call it, it needs to display that data that's stored in those objects. To do that, you store the data in what's called an adapter, and then you use a list view widget to display all the data that's been stored in that adapter. So this is what it's shown. And if I'd click on this one, for example, I'd get the information over here. So the layout is actually shown, the list view layout is shown on the rest, or the bottom half, I should say, of page 315. Now the code that creates and sets, all right, the code that's going to go in there and create and set this is shown in figure 1013 on pages 316 and 317. Now back in chapter 5, if you may or may not remember, but we used a spinner widget where we asked the user if they wanted to split the bill, and did they want to split it 2 ways, 3 ways, 4 ways. All right. The reason I'm telling you that is we used an adapter to display the array of strings for each one of those selections. Now what we're doing in here is we're using another type of adapter to display data in a list view widget. All right. We're using the simple adapter class to display data in the list view widget described previously. The code creates an array of strings that contain the name of keys that get the data. All right, it works with key value pairs. So you can use the simple adapter class to display data in a list view object. All right, and they talk about the constructor here and the different components in it. I'm not going to run through those. Next, in figure 1014 on pages 318 and 319, it shows how to handle the events that occur when the user clicks a list item. So the on-item click method is executed when the user clicks on an item. Within that method, the third parameter provides the position of that item, so you know exactly which story or which item you want to show. I'm doing great for time here. All right. So the next thing that's discussed are intents. So there's a lot of different words in here. And you have to, if nothing else, if you understand the terminology, you're on your way to understanding this. So in the newsreader app, the items activity displays a list of items. If you click on one of the items, you need to display the data for that item in the item activity. To do that, you pass or use what's called an intent to pass data from the items activity to the item activity. So items is this. Item, plural. Singular is here. Now back in chapter 8, we talked a little bit about an intent. And an intent is an object that provides a description of an operation to be performed. When an intent specifies a specific component within an app, for example, an activity, then it's called an explicit intent. So it specifies a component. You can use an explicit intent to pass data from one activity to another. The intent class provides this get in extra and some methods for most primitive data types. All right. So that's all fine, but we want to be able to view a URL in a browser as well. So figure 1016, which is on pages 322 and 323, they show you how to view a URL in a web browser. To do that, you use an implicit intent. Now, we just looked at an explicit intent just a second ago. And remember, an explicit intent specifies a component. An implicit intent specifies the action you want to perform. So you specify it, and then Android determines the best app to perform that action. The first example that you see here begins by creating a string for a URL that links to a news article on the internet. Then it uses the parse method of the URI class, URI is Uniform Resource Indicator, to create a URI object for this link. After it creates the object, it creates an intent object. And it passes the action view, as you can see right here, constant as the first argument, and the URI object as the second argument. Now, this second example that's here shows how to use an implicit intent to dial or call a phone number. The action is similar to viewing a web page in a browser, but there's three primary differences. First, the string that specifies the URL. This started with HTTP. This must start with tel. Second, the first parameter must be an action dial. All right. And third, if you use the action call, you must add the call phone permission in the Android manifest XML file. So you actually can call from here. But if you do that, then you have to make sure that if indeed, again, if you do that, you must make sure that you change the manifest file, and also you cannot repeat. You cannot do that. All right, one more time. You cannot do that if you are working with an emulator. You cannot place phone calls from the emulator. All right. So the author says, now we're ready to see how all of this fits together. So the rest of the chapter, starting on page 324, is going to go through the newsreader app. One more time, an explicit intent specifies a component such as an activity. You use an explicit intent to pass data from one activity to another. An implicit intent specifies the action to be performed, but Android determines the best app to use. You can use an implicit intent to view a URL or to call a phone number. So, as we come in and start actually looking now at the newsreader app, I think this is a good place to break, and I will have one more video for this chapter shortly.